Okay, so this is going to be a pretty casual presentation just about my experiences in interning in a firm in Orlando and then Seattle. Mostly just talking about what I learned at both of those firms and the kind of work I did, and then also what I learned just living in two really different cities, and how those both have kind of influenced me to be a better, more well-rounded designer coming back to school from those experiences. So starting with the firm in Orlando, this is a really big consulting firm. They have like 400 locations worldwide or something. And this branch specifically focuses a lot on like hospitality and tourism driven design. So coming into this firm, I had to really get used to big concepts and something that like drives every single design decision you make. It's also multidisciplinary, so got really used to working with like architects and interior designers and engineers, the whole round of all those people. So a lot of the work I did here, I can't really talk about on this because it's a lot of confidential stuff with like Disney and Universal and other theme park type things. But some of the projects I can talk about, this was in Clearwater, Florida. So the beach, if you can see my cursor, is up in the north, or I guess in this plan, that would be the west, or the east, I mean. And then down here is downtown running perpendicularly to this site. And currently this is just kind of parking lots and some open lots. And the downtown area had been kind of going through some downfalls because all of the beach was taking attention away from the downtown. So they wanted this park to come in to really drive in a lot more tourism around this area. So putting in like a 40,000 person amphitheater and putting in different nature trails for residents in these buildings to enjoy, splash pads and plazas and a bunch of different areas for flexible spaces and events to happen. So this is a really cool project to be a part of and definitely the kind of work I'm interested in doing. And so they brought me on as the landscape architect on the team because it was just kind of a 2-week long charrette with a bunch of architects and interior designers. And I was on a team where we kind of just sketched up a bunch of little conceptual drawings of what these areas could look like based on like Florida and nature. So we did a lot of stuff like marshlands and a bunch of native plantings and sand dunes and other things that you would find in Florida, and found a way to make that into a physical form in like these areas of the site for the most part. So that was a really cool project to learn to work on and really just hone in on my like conceptual design skills. And then the other big project that I spent probably 60% of my time on was a convention center. So this was all currently a parking lot too. So we were looking at ways to improve water quality that was going to flow into what was water down here. And also just really make it a special place when you're coming into Florida for the first time to arrive at. So lots of work on CAD for this because it was mostly designed when I got there. I kind of worked around with like this area the most design-wise, but it was a lot of me learning how to use CAD and Revit. So that was cool to learn. And then I got to work alongside the in-house watercolor artist and create like really cool conceptual master plans for this. So it was kind of a back and forth between him and I the whole time of like me doing the line work and photoshopping in a bunch of things and textures and trees and shadows, and then him coloring it all in. So that was really cool to see like professional level rendering going on in the office, especially hand drawn instead of just done on the computer. And then I moved to Seattle after that. For the 4th year, we have the opportunity to go and do an internship somewhere out of the state instead of taking studio that semester. Among other options too, you can do independent studies or study abroad somewhere, but I chose to do this because I wanted to get some more experience under my belt and then also just have the opportunity to go live somewhere and make some money while I was doing it. So I found this firm in Seattle, and they do like really local work. It's a really small firm. So it was different going from like that 60-person multidisciplinary firm where you're doing projects in like China and Alaska and all over the world and working for Disney, to going to the small firm that does mostly everything with just the Parks and Rec department, and for like King County or just mostly Western Washington. And a lot of the projects we did were projects like this, where it was like almost kind of the stuff that we do for the Surettes, where we take an existing park and we kind of just update it to what the community is now looking for. So this was one that we talked a lot to the community about what they really wanted to happen, and figure out how to make it suit their current needs, because it was built in like the 50s or 60s or something. I can't remember for sure. This was another one. It was a trail planning project that it was pretty much just me and a principal on the project. So it was really cool to have that much free reign. That's another big difference between going from that big firm that has other interns and a lot of stuff going on, to going to this firm that they really depended on me for a lot of this work, because they only had 18 people and they really needed the help when I came in. So it was cool to like actually take the reins on something and take it where I wanted to go with it. So this one was a lot of adjusting existing trails to be more accessible and more well-known with wayfinding and safer, but like better lit, and just listening to a lot of the community concerns and finding ways to connect these two neighborhoods between those trails. So that was a really cool project, and something that almost felt like so small that I didn't think anyone was really going to care. But then we had a community meeting on a rainy Saturday morning, and we had probably 30 to 40 people show up. So that was pretty cool to see how passionate everyone was about their neighborhood. And also like they were all very concerned about the environment effects, because it has like a stream running through it with salmon. So it was just so cool to see people so passionate about where they lived and making sure that we wanted to like do it the right way. And this is another project that I worked on a lot there. So it was a bus line project, which doesn't really scream like you need a landscape architect on the team, but it was really cool to be on that team and have a voice in it and be able to show them like bus only lanes and rain gardens and extra trees and things going on that really help the environment get better, but also improve the ridership experience. So I think having a landscape architect on a team like that really can just vouch for like the person and the environment. So these were kind of just like more of those humbling experiences to be a part of, because I don't think these are the projects that people like get into with like as a landscape architect as their like goal of what they want to work at, but they're really important projects. And I think that it's just so cool to be a part of them and develop that interest for them and respect for them. Like this isn't a pretentious career at all. So you have to learn how to like hone in on those smaller projects and take control of them and have fun with them. And this is a project too where I just really got to hone in on my Photoshop abilities. So I got to spend just like hours doing things like this every day. So I had a lot of fun with this project. So those were pretty much my experiences at the firms themselves. It was really cool to work at two different firms that had two very different scopes and aspects going on. I think I learned a lot about what I'm looking for when I graduate, or what I was looking for this upcoming summer in an internship. I still don't know if I would prefer multidisciplinary or landscape, but I know I want to do these public projects. I know that I like working with the community a lot, so something more like the one I did in Seattle, but maybe with the scope of the projects in Stantec would be really cool. So it was cool to just get that experience, and then also really interesting to learn how to talk to two different ranges of clients, whether it be like those big clients down in Florida versus just my neighbors in Seattle. So I think it was really beneficial to have two like very different firms and learn a lot through that. And then I also learned a lot just by being in like two different areas. So like Orlando is way different than Seattle. And I wasn't initially very excited to go at all. I kind of thought of it as like a glorified suburb, and just being there in like June, July, and August in Florida, I wasn't very excited for that. So going into it, I kind of had to like set up an expectation for myself to like find something there to do every day that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do in Virginia. So I'd be walking around a lot and just like admiring all of the different types of architecture. I lived right next to Rollins College, so it was really cool to see like very Spanish influenced architecture next door to like someone's cottage. And then, yeah, so going on walks all the time near there. I was reading on the dock every night, kayaking every chance I had. I lived next to like a chain of lakes, so I would just take my kayak out and read. And on the weekends, I would just kayak from lake to lake and island to island, which is really cool. So really taking advantage of like being somewhere new and forcing myself to go out and do something every time I was there. And then on the weekends, I would travel to like other cool cities and beaches nearby and visit friends who are going to University of Florida. I went to Savannah, which is like a really cool city. I went there 2 or 3 times, I think, and just a couple times by myself, couple times meeting friends who are doing internships in Charleston. So that was a really cool city because it has, 21 squares. It was planned out that way. Like, I can't remember the year, sorry, Terry. But you'll learn a lot about Savannah in Terry's history class. And it's just such a cool city and has this really distinct culture. And it's just so much fun to talk to the people and go out and just be a part of it all. And then same with Charleston. It's just this beautiful city that you almost feel like you're in like the Caribbean or New Orleans or something very French influenced. It's almost like Savannah, but it's a little more like uppity. It's pretty cool. So spending all my weekends doing stuff like that was just, it made it for a better experience. And it definitely, I have a little soft place in my heart for Orlando now. And it definitely taught me a lot about being alone and being by myself and like being comfortable doing that. And that's a skill or a trait that I'm like super glad that I had when I moved out to Seattle. Because this was my first time on the West Coast. I had like no friends there except for a friend who lived 5 hours away in Oregon. So I was obviously like a little nervous going into it. I was afraid it would take me a while to make friends, and then I was going to be just stuck inside because it was going to be raining all the time. So I was nervous going into it, but luckily I had that confidence and just assurance of being by myself, and I knew that I could handle it. And like automatically my first weekend there, it just put all of my worries to ease. I ended up somehow like first row to a Rolling Stones concert within 12 hours. And then my friend came and visited me from Oregon the next day. He surprised me and we went to Pike Market, bought a bunch of foods and stuff for camping. He wanted to go to the first Starbucks ever because he was a coffee master. We met when we worked at Starbucks together. So a really fun experience of having him in the city. And then we drove up to the Olympic Peninsula the next day. This was our first hike at, I think it was called Crescent Lake. Crescent Lake, I think, which is a glacier-fed lake. The water was so clear and so cold. And then driving up to the most northern part of the coast of, well, continental coast of the United States, which was Maca Bay, I want to say. So this is a picture of just like the rock formations on the beach and always overcast, the really cool driftwood patterns you'll find there. We spent the day just surfing and fishing, and then had a bonfire on the beach and camped out on the beach that night. So that was my first like 72 hours in Seattle or just Washington. And already I was like, okay, this is a really cool place to be. So when I got back to the city, I just made sure to like go start exploring by myself as much as I could. One of the first stops was Gasworks Park, which I don't know if you guys have learned about it yet, but it's a really cool post-industrial site that Richard Hogg designed. one of the first of its kind of them seeing a structure like this and deciding to preserve it instead of just tearing it down and putting it in a more traditional park. And so the main gasworks are fenced off like this, but there's areas that come out. So I would always string up my hammock between these posts here and just watch people go by and read my books. And then you can see like nature taking this over. It's just a really cool sight, and it's beautiful to see something that used to maybe be considered an eyesore, and now everyone in the city embraces it and sees it as like this sculptural wonder instead. And then there's this big hill that's been built. You get really cool views of the city skyline from on top of that. And it was really cool to see everyone coming out at once and just enjoying it how they want to. So there's people who are doing like sprints up the hill. There's people playing volleyball. There's yoga classes and parkour classes going on. There's always someone with a guitar out there, people playing Frisbee, everyone with their dogs, kids just running everywhere. So like, it was just so cool to see something that it's like all of those things we list in our program when we're designing something, every single one of them was actually happening at the same time. So that was pretty cool to see something be used like that. And these are just two views. This is from the east of it. You can kind of see all of the houseboats going on and just see how much of like a water culture Seattle has, and still get that view of Gasworks, which you can get. I could see it from the top of my building too. And then just more of these like sailboats and the view of the city. That's a picture Tess took of me. There's some areas where you can still kind of sneak into the actual structures like that and climb on top of them. And there's Tess. There's other ones that they have painted and they look inviting to climb. Never really sure if you were supposed to climb on them or not, because I can't tell which graffiti was put by people and what was put by the park. But that's definitely something that no one really tells you to get off. I think it's just climb at your own risk if you want. So always would spend some time out there messing around with some of my climbing buddies. Another really cool park that I didn't even know was so influential until I got back to school and learned about it was Freeway Park. Seattle's a really hilly city, and then to make it worse, they've got this big highway, I-5, that cuts through the middle of it. So the only ways to go over I-5, there were a couple bridges, not like none of them were pedestrian only. All of them have cars that are like 1 foot away from you because it's a pretty narrow sidewalk, and they all just go in this huge like hill. I've never seen someone able to bike over them without having to get off their bike and walk, which makes you think like it's not probably a 5% slope. It doesn't really accommodate for people with any type of disabilities, or just people who are afraid of being near cars like that. So Freeway Park was just such a cool solution to that problem. And when you're inside of it, it just feels like the city has gone away. It's just so quiet, and you feel like you're almost like the city was taken over by a jungle, because the moss is taking over these concrete forms. The planting is so informal and just like everywhere. And then closer to the edges where the highway is, and when you get back onto the streets of where your destination is, they put in a lot of water features that drown out the sound of the highway still. So even when you're on the edges, you feel removed from the city. So that was a really cool park. Definitely one I spent more passing through time through it just to get to places than I did actually in the park. But I really appreciated it, and definitely would go out of my way to walk through this part of town versus going to like just one of those normal bridges.
You finished it, submitted it, it's all done.
Yeah.
Sorry, this picture is kind of blurry. But then another one that I really liked going to was Olympic Sculpture Park. Had this really cool concrete wall that had just, the expansion joints were just concrete laid on top of each other rather than putting actual joints in the concrete. So I really loved the wall, really loved a lot of the sculpture. That's an Alexander Calder piece. It also had a Richard Serra piece and a couple other really like fun ones that had these cool concepts, and it was almost just kind of like a puzzle to figure out what they meant. So that was a really cool park to take people to. This was a fun picture I took one day of the Richard Serra sculpture was interacting with the wind and the ginkgo tree leaves and kind of creating this almost like Andy Goldsworthy effect on the ground. So I thought that was pretty cool. and then just the pedestrian connections over the railway and to the water. This is definitely like one of the best ways to get over to Centennial Park, which is directly west of, or north, I guess, of the sculpture park. Another really cool park I would like to go to would be Seattle Center. This was for the World's Fair in 1967 or something, I want to say. But it's like this huge park with a whole bunch of different museums and culture parks and a bunch of different plazas and areas. This one is the International Fountain. This picture is taken at the Elizabeth Warren rally, so it's not always that crowded, but it is a really good place for those huge events like that. And that fountain is also just really cool too. It plays music along with the jets going out from different areas, and I would always run down this ramp on this side, run through the water, and then run up the ramp on the other side during my runs. Nice little cool down. One of my other favorite parts of the Seattle Center, there's this really cool playground by Design Workshop. And it was right next to, you can see it here, the Pop Culture Museum. So they really just made it super playful place, all about like artists at play and music. So you can play music on like every single one of these structures. They make different sounds. There were quotes and little details from kids throughout the whole thing. This definitely inspired me, like this pavement pattern in my most recent design. So that was one of those places that I lived 10 minutes away from, and I would always take my friends to when they came to visit me, because it was like, that's adult scale. You can climb on that as a 22-year-old, which is pretty cool. And then another thing by Design Workshop were the Amazon spheres. They were like this huge greenhouse in the city. Really great for like a rainy day. If you can get inside of them, you have to know someone who works at Amazon to get inside, but has all of that fake vitamin D coming in. So pretty cool to see all of these like super exotic plantings. They have some of the most rare types of flowers and plantings in the world, where it's like one of 3 in existence. And then Design Workshop also just does a really good job of like designing different types of spaces and different scales, different levels of comfort, and transition zones and everything. So that's a firm that I learned about through these internships that I just really fell in love with, and they do some really good work. And then some of the less like maybe not significantly designed parks, but ones that I thought were pretty special. Cary Park has a really cool view of the city. You get the Sound over here, the Olympic Mountains over there, the Cascade Mountains you can sometimes see, and then Rainier on a clear day you can see. So that becomes one of those really special parts of the city that everyone goes out to see nighttime views of the city, but also on a clear day, so you can see Rainier. And then Golden Gardens and Alki Beach were really cool, because on like a Thursday night after work, you could take a bus out there and have a bonfire on the beach, which like, I don't know any other cities where you can do that. So if you guys know any other city where I can have a bonfire on a Thursday night, like in the city, it was pretty cool. Centennial Park, which I talked a little about earlier, it's just a really long linear park that goes along the water, cool views of the Olympic Mountains, and a lot of these like really naturalistic looking beaches where they just put in a bunch of rocks and driftwood. So that's somewhere that I like to spend a lot of just like time by myself. So I fell into a pretty cool routine here where every day I'd get off work at 5 o'clock, and I was doing the same thing I did in Florida, where I was like, okay, every day I'm going to do something that I wouldn't be able to do in school in Virginia. So whether it was like thrifting or going to my climbing gym, or I was making dinners with my friends, using the community gardens, taking advantage of their kitchens because I only had a microwave and a mini fridge to work with. This is a picture from Occidental Square and Pioneer Square. Every Thursday, or every first Thursday of the month, they did an art crawl where all of the galleries, because they're just like back-to-back galleries throughout this district, they would all open up and just have wine and cheese, and you could just wander around and look at art. So that was a cool tradition. And then to live like in the heart of the city, there's just always something going on. So I would spend like, there's probably a 2-week or 2-month period where I was going to a concert every week. This was in Pike Market. And it was The Head and the Heart. They were singing on top of the structure there, which was pretty cool. And it was just a free concert that they put on for the whole city. So really cool stuff going on in the city. And then I would spend a lot of my weekends exploring outside of the city. I really loved going to Portland. I went there 3 times during my time there. Keller Fountain was one of those really cool parks to see in Portland. It was designed by Lawrence Halpern, who's the same one that did Freeway Park in Seattle that I talked about. So to go to these like super iconic like landscape architecture pieces, it was just so cool because I've never been exposed to something with that like in that proximity in my life before. So Keller Park was really cool. Another one that I really liked was Tanner Springs Park. I think it did a really cool, like good way of bringing together these urban and natural aspects and kind of like breaking up those urban aspects and morphing them into this more naturalistic design. So that was definitely one of my favorites to visit too. And then outside of cities, I obviously was just trying to go on hikes as much as I could. And this was up in the Olympic Peninsula again. Seeing these just insane displays of foliage and like rock formations was so cool to me. That was Mount Townsend in the Olympics. This is Mailbox Peak. It's actually a hike that you can take a bus right from the library in the city. It's a 45-minute bus and you end up like in the middle of nature, which is super cool too, because I've never been to a city before where you can just get on a bus and be in just wilderness within 45 minutes. So that was really cool. This one was my first snow hike. We got dumped down on in the middle of the hike and got lost. Couldn't tell you where we ended up. We definitely took a wrong turn at some point, somewhere on the PCT. This is just a waterfall and snow hike again. This one was special to me because I was starting to miss the fall colors of the East Coast. You didn't really get that quite as much out here as evergreen. And this is the first hike that I really saw, like, I think this was a beech tree and it was just glowing. And I think I almost appreciated it even more because having that dark green background, it just popped more than like a yellow tree on the East Coast would have popped. So that one made me happy. That's another one from the same hike, but just looking at the rock formations, like I have never been somewhere like that before. So that was just really cool to see. And then these are all pictures, I think, coming up from Oregon. So the Oregon coast, we ended up camping on this beach. One night we rolled up like 3 a.m., slept our tent. We ended up being like super close to Cannon Beach, which is the rock from Goonies, if you guys are familiar. So that was just so cool to wake up to a view like this, because when we were setting up camp at 3 a.m., we had no idea it was going to look like that when we woke up. And then that's the rock. That thing is huge too. Like a person wouldn't even be as big as that rock there. So it was just insane to see things that are so different to me. And then to be able to drive in the same day out to the Painted Hills and just be like in this desert environment that almost felt like you're out in the Southwest. And then Crater Lake, that's like a 5,000 foot deep lake. That was really cool to see too. That's just a picture that I thought was kind of funny. Crater Lake again, or Crater Lake, not Crater Lake. And then this is a picture of Pebble Beach. The rocks here were really cool to me because when the waves would come in, they would pull back all of the rocks and they would just be tumbling on top of each other, and it would be like one of those rain tubes that you would flip around. So it was just so soothing. We just sat on these rocks for hours with like soaking in the sun and just listening to that sound, playing with the seals that were all in the water. You can kind of see all of the birds and seals would be down here. So it was really cool just to be like a part of nature like that. And then this is a picture of Mount St. Helens. We ended up climbing that one weekend. The mountain used to be more like that until the eruption in the 80s, I think it was. This is a little video from the top, if it works. We made a little snowman for a friend who didn't make it to the top. You can see the lava dome down there. Um, that's not very near Mount Adams. Mount Hood is right there. You can see Mount Baker that day. And then there's this tradition of just getting on your butt and sliding the whole way down. So we ended up actually climbing the mountain twice just so we could slide down twice because it was just so much fun. And then you can't go to Bend without going to the Last Standing Blockbuster video. So we ended up doing that one night and just going home and watching a bunch of Blockbuster videos, making good brownies and food. And then hiking season kind of ended when it just got rainy and dark all the time, but then snow season started. So this was Mount Hood. It was my first experience snowboarding anywhere that wasn't East Coast. You might recognize the mountain. Timberline Lodge is right here, and that's where they shot The Shining, all of the outdoor scenes of that. So that was pretty cool. And then this is Tess. We met up at Whistler one weekend, and that's where they hosted the 2008 Olympics or something, 2010 maybe, I can't remember. So that was really cool too, because it was an insane mountain. And then to be around all of those like different cultures, you would be skiing and there'd be 5 different languages going back and forth on the train with you or on the lift with you. So that was just super cool too, to be like crossing that off the bucket list and being somewhere like that surrounded by all those people. So that's just so I guess from Orlando, I learned how to be alone, and in Seattle, I learned how to like take that confidence alone and turn it into something so beneficial. I really learned a lot about like work-life balance of doing something fun every night of the week and doing something big every weekend. Learning that it will make you better at work too. You come back in like revitalized and inspired and ready to do something. And that's just like traveling in general too, just being able to see and like live among all of these cultures. The thing I really love about like these slow travel experiences of being there for months instead of like just a couple days, I think you really get to start to understand like the hardships and the frustrations of a community and how design has come through to like solve those. And then you get to celebrate the successes alongside the community. And you understand that a lot more when you like live there versus when you just pass through it. I think another benefit of like traveling a lot and especially like living in different places, you really learn how to be adaptable and understand change and really just look forward to like all of those changes and like learning to be flexible. So I think that's a really important trait to have as a designer, because like whether we're dealing with clients coming in and wanting changes every week that are super different, or climate change, learning how to like quickly solve new things and come up with new ways of thinking, or just like changes like we're going through right now with like everything going online and trying to adapt to that. Like having these qualities that travel has taught me have made that easier to adapt to. And I've been applying that to like my sense of trying to take things day by day and doing something every day, with like doing this now with everything being online and dealing with that adjustment, trying to find that one thing every day that I can take control over and like find that joy. Personally, I've been doing a lot of like walking and running and just driving around, trying to figure out what I can do that makes me happy. And then I think another important thing is like, it's hard to tell you guys to be able to like take life by its reins right now and go travel and go take an internship somewhere out of state. But I think it's important to remember to do this like when the world opens back up. It's all temporary, what's happening right now. And the first thing I'm going to do is go back out west. And I think that's like important for everyone to just think ahead and think of what they're going to do when this is over. Because you'll learn a lot if you just get out of your comfort zone. So that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about today. I hope that maybe I inspired some travel or internship experiences for someone, or at the very least that you guys enjoyed all of my pictures. So if there's any questions, I'll be open to take any.
Hi, I have a question. So I really appreciate you talking about your experiences and everything. It was kind of nice to hear in these times. But could you talk a little bit about sort of your process of reaching out to the firm and how the whole, I guess, interview song and dance went? Yeah.
Yeah. The one in Orlando, it was actually a Virginia Tech alumni. So Terry let us know about that one. I think we have a lot of alumni all over the world, and like we get those emails from Susan like every week talking about them. So to actually like reach out to them would be really good. And the first place to start, I think. The interview for that, it was just like a Zoom call that I did with them because it was somewhere far away. And it was just me sharing my portfolio, and we talked through it. And then just understanding what I was looking for in an internship and what they were looking for from me. And then the second one I found just through a Google search. I kind of just knew that I wanted to be somewhere like way different. I had never been to Seattle before. I actually started looking at ones in Portland and ended up finding the Seattle one along the way. And I just called them and I was like, hey, are you guys hiring like fall interns? And they said they weren't, but I talked to the guy on the phone for a little while and he was like, oh, it wouldn't hurt to have an interview. So we ended up doing an interview and he gave me the job like 4 days later. So I think just to get like, just to kind of push yourself to go look for something and to call them instead of just like sending off an email, I think helps a lot. But yeah, I think you going into fourth year, I don't know what your plans are, but doing something in the fall, especially because I know a lot of like summer internship programs have been canceled, I think could be like a really good way for you to get some of these experiences that I did too.
Cool. Thank you.
Madison, what are some of the things that the firms were looking for in a student? Because it seemed like you were somewhat familiar with, was it Revit and the other software that you were talking about?
I think both of them were looking more for like willingness to learn and just like that design, not like programs. Because I didn't know Revit or AutoCAD when I went into these firms. Like I kind of knew AutoCAD at like maybe a 20% level. Never opened up Revit before, so I definitely learned those through that internship. Same with Photoshop. I had touched it a little bit, but not like anywhere near to what I can do now with it. They're mostly just looking for someone who is going to come into work and like be ready to learn and want to learn, and someone who's going to like be independent enough to do it, but also rely on people when they need help. So I think as long as you're just like willing to learn, that's all they really want.
Were there prereqs for software learning or for having known some of the software?
I think depending on the firm, I know some of the ones I've been applying to, they request that you know like AutoCAD, Photoshop. Some of them want you to know like Rhino, SketchUp, Revit. But for the most part, no, maybe they want Photoshop and some InDesign experience. AutoCAD is always good to have, but they definitely are always willing to teach you, at least depending on the firm. If you find the right firm, they'll be willing to help you out.
Madison, can I tell a little story about your getting that job at Stantec though?
Yeah.
So it's not unusual, actually it's very usual for faculty to get personal requests for names of students that might fit their firm. So it's really important that faculty know what your design interests and aesthetic are, as well as your work habits. And so in that particular case, John Templeton at Stantec had called and he said, I need someone that's interested in theme design. And so I was teaching the third year class at the time and I offered it up to everybody and said, okay, so who would that be? And everybody in the class pointed at Madison. Of course, Madison didn't participate in the information session that we had, the first one that we had with John, but everybody did understand right away that Madison's design aesthetic fit with that really well. But what they were really looking for was people that were creative and willing to be creative. And also, as Madison said, really willing and wanting to learn. So it wasn't so much to go in and be a computer nerd. There are firms that want that. But there are a lot of other opportunities, and they're hiring interns to teach them, but also because as students, you're usually not too tied up in the baggage of what can and cannot be done, and more in what are the ideas of what's possible. And so there's a freshness that many firms are looking for when they're looking for entry level or particularly interns to be working for short periods of time.
Hey, Terry, do you want to comment on the current situation that many of us find ourselves in looking for summer internships or potentially fall internships that may or may not be available? I know my search and Rana's search have been unsuccessful with a number of different firms and different people that we've talked to. So do you have any comment on that?
Well, I think it's everybody's in that situation, actually. Everybody, all of the firms are working at home in Virginia. And most of the people I know in the Carolinas, in Maryland and Pennsylvania, the same thing. And so there's a real question about what they can do and what they can't do. But in terms of hiring people. But it's actually not a particularly bad time to be building relationships with firms to find out what people do. And so it's not so much about the first question being, do you have a job? Is going, I'm really interested in the firm's work. What do you have going on? Or what have you been working on? But obviously having already looked at that, so it's not like a cold call. So with the unemployment situation nationally at this point, I think it's not expected that there's going to be a lot of office jobs that are out there. But it's my understanding that a lot of the construction jobs or the firms, the nurseries that are still doing installation work, getting their hands dirty and actually making things. And in those firms, they do an awful lot of design work as well. And so sounding out your options is not a bad thing. I'm remembering when I graduated, it was during an economic downturn, and we had a little competition going between my classmates and I, and how many refusals we could get for from different firms. But what it meant is that we were out there making contacts and making connections, and many people will get the jobs as the economy opens back up again, in part because they were building relationships with people and not waiting around for somebody to ask them. We don't know what's going to be happening a month from now, much less what's going to be happening in the fall. So it's a continuing process of making connections as best you can using the resources that you have. Remember that the work that you're doing in your studios and in your class is the thing that you have to show them about your interests, about how you design, about what interests you in design. And then it's important to get those pieces in your portfolio. Because most firms are hiring a person rather than a set of skills. And that's, I wish I had better answers for what to do to go, otherwise to go ahead, but being entrepreneurial about how you think is actually really important. So Madison, what, I appreciate a lot that you talked about the value of personal and professional growth in participating and pursuing on the two different types of internships that you did and in vastly different places. Could you talk a little bit about what you think the firms really appreciated about what you did and what you offered?
I know that both of them in my exit interviews, their thing that they like admired the most was just my willingness to like work as a team. They really liked that I was like always trying to be like asking questions and trying to be a part of things. So that like willingness to learn again, just those qualities are something that they're all definitely looking for. None of them were really like impressed. I mean, I'm not saying they weren't impressed, but none of them were like, oh yeah, you did so much for us because of all of your Photoshop stuff and AutoCAD stuff. Like they really just cared that I would come over to their desks and ask them questions and like talk to them face to face rather than sending an email. They liked that I was like always there and working instead of sitting there and like texting or doing something on my computer that wasn't work. So I think you're right. They're just looking for like the person and someone who just is a part of the team rather than someone who can just show up and do some busy work and get their work done and go home.
How do you feel like working at these internships has changed your own kind of personal practice, whether it be your actual design or just how you go about getting that?
I think definitely like traveling around and seeing a lot of these different like projects and examples, but also just like being outside in nature and seeing all of these different like shows of just like what the earth has to offer definitely inspires me and brings me like concepts into my work. So it heavily influences my design. And then I think it also just influences like my approach as a landscape architect. It really reaffirmed my values of like what I want to do, which is like creating those public spaces, restoring and also like protecting those natural spaces. So I think that that definitely influenced me there. And I think it also just like helps me stay like passionate and like interested and engaged in what I do. Being able to go around and see like people actually using what we design and seeing like where design could be like well enforced to influence something. Just having those like values reinforced every day through like traveling was really important to me, and helped me build like an interest and passion for all of this kind of stuff. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Passion is a really kind of nebulous thing, and it's good to find the things that really make you feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
Going into this upcoming internship season, do you have like, I mean, I know it's gotten pretty weird, but have you had some kind of strategy that you've used for finding firms you would be interested in or reaching out to them?
Definitely know what I'm looking for now. So it was kind of like pick and choose between firms that I knew of already, and then just doing research on like the way to start is like looking for the cities I'm interested in. So I was looking for ones that are in like Colorado and Seattle again, Montana, and finding those firms that do those public projects. I think I definitely learned like I made some connections at firms through my internships, and I learned about firms that I never would have heard of if I didn't like live in that city. So that definitely helped me find and like see the examples of those works, like the design workshop one in Seattle, being able to like be a part of those and seeing what they do firsthand really helped me to see that that's a firm that I would like to work for. But yeah, I think they really just helped me understand what I was looking for in a firm, like the kind of place that I want to work for and the projects I want to do. And then from there, you can just start to either choose through the ones that we get sent out through emails, or going to the career fair and kind of choosing through those ones, or going online and just like tailoring a Google search to what you're looking for. There's something out there for everyone.
I would say though, at this point, it's not a time to be picky about them. So you're not asking in a internship or a short-term summer job, or even just kind of a weekend or a really short-term project for something that is going to sustain you for the rest of your life. But really looking out there and say there's a lot to be learned by planting trees and perennials. There's a lot about design to be learned there, but there's also a lot of respect that you learn for people that are going to be doing that for you later when you become a landscape architect or a landscape designer. And so really kind of thinking about not the whole job, but the pieces that you can learn and learn to be good at and learn to ask questions about and to get better at. If we think about landscape architecture as being kind of a combination of science and art, we don't do that by ourselves. We learn that from a lot of other people and from the projects that we work on that continue to inform us later on. So getting a job, any sort, is a good thing. But if you're not, then what is it that you're doing to kind of entertain yourself in an intellectual way that contributes to your thinking about design and about making places and those things that you are passionate about, whether it's a nebulous passion or whether it's one that really drives you when you get out of bed in the morning.
So you talked about working in a larger scene and a much smaller scene. What are your thoughts on the in-between, or have you ever thought about trying to experience the in-between size, like the 20 or so people?
Yeah, those are, I think that's what I was looking for this summer, was one that I could kind of be in one of those in-between zones. So I haven't experienced it yet, but it's something I definitely want to try out. And I was trying to look for more of those landscape only firms this summer too. That was something I think I learned was like, even though that one that was 60 people was like huge, it was multidisciplinary. So the landscape team was only like 12 people, I think. So I think it's like landscape architecture is a pretty small profession unless you're going to like a really big office that has like world-renowned projects and has 80 people in one office. You'll probably find more of the firms like the ones I worked for in Seattle where it's just like a 20-person team, which I really liked. You got to really get to know everyone you worked with and like work on a project with every person in the office instead of working on the projects with like one or two people in the whole office.
Any other questions for Madison or anyone else? Hearing a deathly silence, I think we're done. Thank you, Madison. There's lots of loud clapping going on in a very